All right, what's going on? We are here in Captain Brunch's lair, cave,
den.
underground den.
Oh, it's like swamp. It's my
Swamp thing.
swamp area.
Yeah, all right. So this is Smooth Thoughts coming to you live.
What's up, everybody?
I'm Chimp, good man John over here, and our special guest today, the Captain Brunch.
Nice to be here.
Unless you want to be referred to as something else.
You can call me Prem. It doesn't matter.
Where's Captain Brunch come from?
Well, I host an event called Bitcoin Brunch on Sundays. And so it sort of came out of the meme culture from the people who like to hang out on our Telegram chat room. And so as the person who started the brunch, and by day I work in a shipyard as a mechanic. So somehow I just became Captain Brunch, even though I'm not a captain.
Or a captain.
That all sounds very luxurious.
Yeah, life is nice.
Oh, that's Miami, right? As long as you give off the impression.
Well, I certainly lead that little group. So, I'm the captain of the Bitcoin Brunch.
Yeah, so thanks for coming on. I guess we had an idea for this to be our sort of Bitcoin episode. We don't really get into Bitcoin that much.
No, we don't. We've talked about it a little bit, but now we have the host of Bitcoin Brunch. So you could tell he is definitely into Bitcoin, but not shitcoins. Am I correct?
This is absolutely correct. So for over 70 weeks, I've hosted Bitcoin Brunch because I think Bitcoin is the future of money. And I'm not so confident about the other things, which I mostly think are projects, are companies, are people's hobbies. Like someone who was an entrepreneur, like they decided they wanted, I'm going to be an entrepreneur or I'm going to be a developer. And then they're like, what am I going to entrepreneur or what am I going to develop? And then they're like, here's this thing, this crypto stuff going on. So that's mostly what I see. I think it's just people just trying to pick a subject to fill their career choice. And that's cool. But the problem is that Bitcoin itself was founded in this kind of decentralized, anarchistic way that didn't have, as far as we can tell, sort of like a profit motive underlying it. The people who built it, people who invested their time in the first several years were doing so completely, not necessarily altruistically, but just out of their personal interest. It was like a hobby. There was no one saying, hey, you guys are going to be millionaires one day for doing this little science project.
But there is a message, right? Even from the beginning, it was a very anti-bank, anti-fiat message.
Yeah. So like the first block, I think, it's either the first block or the first transaction, but I think it's the first block has the message "Chancellor on the brink of a second bailout." So it was a commentary from the Times of, it was a headline from the Times of London, 2009 when Bitcoin protocol first went live, and so it was a commentary about that. Is that they just print money, like whenever the big companies or powerful companies are suffering from some kind of a malady due to their business practices, due to the way that the economy works because of the regulations and the way that they've constructed the economy, the government just bails them out instead of allowing them to crumble, bankrupt, whatever would happen to a company that sucks at business.
So one question that comes to mind right away is like, what's the difference between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash? I know it's a fork, but maybe not going into like the technicals of a fork.
Yeah.
What is it that Bitcoin Cash wants to do differently from Bitcoin?
Well, one of the things is going to be the block size. So that translates to how many transactions go on every block. Bitcoin only does one block every 10 minutes, and every block can be about 2 megabytes. So there's only so many hundreds or thousands of transactions you can actually fit in every block. And the Bitcoin Cash people are like, no, like Visa and MasterCard are doing millions of transactions every minute. So we need to get more bigger blocks. And so that's one of the big things.
So Bitcoin Cash is an attempt to make Bitcoin a little more liquid, usable.
And it's not like there was a block size limit at the beginning. So why is it sitting on 2 megabytes? Why can't it be 4 megabytes, 8 megabytes?
So there's several, there might be several reasons. One of them is that in the long, like right now, the Bitcoin blockchain is like 400 or 500 gigabytes large. And if you started to see,
seems like nothing.
yeah, it seems like nothing, but what if it had to like handle millions of transactions a minute? Then it would probably be terabytes large. And then it would have an effect on one of the fundamental like building blocks of Bitcoin, which is the node verification network. So, the computers that serve as the gatekeepers to whether new blocks are valid or not, where the money is being spent is actually valid. So, I currently run a node, a little Raspberry Pi. It's been like sitting on my computer for months, and it just runs. I don't like touch it. I don't do anything to it. I couldn't do that as easily if I had to have terabytes of storage available.
So being that it's only 400 gigs, it lets your Raspberry do the job?
Yeah, I mean, and even if it was terabytes, I would just need to have like really big hard drives, I guess.
So this is something that was voted on basically, because if something forks, the community votes to say, we're going to go in this direction. And so I guess it's kind of like an equilibrium that people have found.
Yeah, so it's a software update. And so people who were adopting Bitcoin Cash went with a software like change to the protocol that made it incompatible with the one that we call BTC today. And there's lots of ways that you might analyze or assess how that worked, and the outcome of that Bitcoin Cash still exists. I've got like a Bitcoin Cash guy who comes to Bitcoin Brunch almost every week. If you cared about price, I don't care about price. It would seem pretty obvious though that if you cared about price, just based on price, Bitcoin Cash is a huge failure. But I don't care about price, so that's to me not like a legitimate argument.
Didn't the same thing happen with Ether? Because I know there's an Ether Classic.
Yes. I mean, there might be like an Ether fork for every single time that they've hard forked. They've hard forked multiple times.
Right. So it seems kind of evolutionary, like almost like it's weird. Were there any blockchains before Bitcoin? Was that the first?
Oh, so if I understand correctly, that phrase didn't necessarily exist until Bitcoin was invented. And so they used that word to describe what the Bitcoin blockchain, like, what that paradigm was. If I understand, there was maybe something like that in an Australian stock exchange system. If I'm remembering some details correctly.
That's interesting.
But I mean, I've had this discussion. There's a lot of ways you can take it. The blockchain. So the idea that there is some data and you're going to be adding or changing the data, but you want to have a record of how the data was originally and then how it is now. I mean, if you ever used like a Google Documents, and if you ever had like a shared document, it saves the history of the document. Is that a blockchain?
Well, I guess I would include like the distributed peer-to-peer aspect. I think if it was a ledger and it was peer-to-peer, I think that specifically the type of blockchain.
But I don't think blockchains need to be distributed though, because you do have a lot of centralized blockchains.
Yeah, so I guess I mean specifically peer-to-peer blockchains.
Yeah, because to me, I think it's more related to like digital timekeeping, like the order of operations more than anything. And that's what makes Bitcoin so special. Like we can keep that first Genesis block and all those transactions.
I guess I just think it's incredible that no new blockchain or whatever you want to call it or define it has really overtaken it. Like that first initial idea is the one that has dominated.
We're definitely trying.
Yeah, overtake it. Again, what does that mean?
In price, I guess.
Yeah.
In popularity.
It's going to be hard because all of these other coins, blockchains, what have you, as I mentioned earlier, are projects. So they have these forces who are at the same time as they build these projects and get people to join them and invest in them, they are also using these projects to extract their own personal livelihood and wealth.
But so is the Bitcoin of today the exact same as the white paper?
No,
it gets tweaked.
Bitcoin
right?
was never the same as the white paper. Like even when Satoshi released it, Bitcoin wasn't the same as the white paper.
There is voting and there is change.
So there is not any kind of formal voting mechanism. The change is it emerges through people's software choices, right? Like what version of the Bitcoin protocol they're running on their nodes. That's what determines. So like the Bitcoin Cash is a great example. So the Bitcoin Cash people created changes to the protocol that allowed the blocks to be bigger. Everyone who was running the original software, they their nodes would see these new blocks and they would say, these are invalid blocks. They don't follow the rules. We do not add them to the blockchain. And then that causes the hard fork.
Yeah, and I love that part that like you get your vote, that sovereignty through having a node. But then it does become an issue because if Bitcoin does get too big in terms of terabytes, then it becomes less accessible in that sense of running a node.
Yeah, and
but assuming that by that time terabytes will be so much easier to put onto like a tiny little thumbnail.
And I do think that would be the case. Bitcoin, it's gotten, and this is kind of interesting. The fact that it's so big makes it, I think, harder for it to change now than it would have been if it was smaller.
Yeah.
So I kind of lament that in some ways because I do wish there was a more vibrant and dynamic community, like debating and arguing over how Bitcoin needs to evolve.
Right.
And instead that kind of just sort of stays in all the altcoin space.
The bigger it gets also, it's the harder it is to attack, right?
Yeah, perhaps. That it depends on what you mean by attack and what kind of attack. There's like various different levels of attack vector.
So like a 51, being that it's so big now, trying to get to 51% of the proof of work.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like, I just read it. It uses annually about as much electricity as Argentina, more than Argentina. But if we just call Argentina, my funny question to you today was going to be like, let's say there's a new Argentinian dictator.
Yeah.
And he says, we're going to use every kilowatt of power in our country to attack Bitcoin.
Oh man, it's going to be hard. They're going to have to like ship in people and food. It's going to be a humanitarian crisis in Argentina. Right. Although if you're talking about Argentina, they kind of already have a humanitarian crisis. It's not as bad as some of the other countries. It would be difficult because you'd need to not only have the access to the energy, but you'd need to have all that hardware available.
And that's what I mean. It's like, of course, let's say something bigger than Argentina. If Argentina is about the thing to include for hardware, organization, logistics, let's say every ounce of bureaucratic power in Russia was aimed towards attacking Bitcoin. I mean, after I looked it up, I realized, it wouldn't even matter because they would be able to maybe get a grip on the entire, protocol for like a few minutes before everybody realizes what's going on. And then you just kick them out and it wouldn't be that difficult for everyone to kind of rally around maybe forking them out.
Well, so it depends on what the nature of the attack is. If they were able to come online, let's say with 51. So right now, I think there are somewhere between 6 and 9 main mining pools that are doing the proof of work project. None of them have 50% or near 50%. But let's say someone came online with 51% of the hash power, and that would automatically put them like leagues ahead of all these other competitors. What do they do with that power? Are they like instituting a censorship regime where they are saying, okay, we're going to continue, mining blocks, but we're not going to allow transactions that we don't approve? What is the nature of the attack? There's a lot of factors that matter because maybe some of these mining pools, especially the publicly traded ones, they're subject to all kinds of regulation and government influence. So maybe that's like a sleeper hidden 51% attack where they're just creating these companies and they're trying to build up the hash power. And maybe once these, they have enough, then they're going to attack Bitcoin. Like, who knows? It could happen. But like, what is the attack really? It's not just that they have the 51%. What do they do with it? And if they're not doing anything nefarious with it, then no one's going to prepare for it or no one's going to, try to react to it. It's only when they start discriminating against certain transactions or start messing with the mempool and ignoring transactions.
Yeah, well, I mean nefarious. I mean, like, how much would it take for the confidence in Bitcoin to be substantially hit?
All right, how about this? How about if all of China started mining and it was a whole CCP effort and they decided to ban any transactions coming out of the States and anyone allied with the States?
Yeah, so
how would that work?
Yeah. if they were censoring transactions, which I think is the main form of attack that a miner could do, then what you end up creating is sort of like these segregated sectors of the network where you've got the miners who are ignoring valid blocks because they are participating in nefarious activity. And then you have the other side where they're creating valid blocks sometimes, because 51% means that most of the time you're going to get the blocks, but not all the time. So that's some of the time when you don't get the blocks, your competitors are making them and you're going to ignore those blocks.
Exactly. So couldn't the nodes, let's say there was some sort of like communication between nodes, if we could actually get together and say, okay, let's not accept any blocks made by the CCP.
Yeah, so that would cause a fork, right? And that would take a concerted effort. That would take a conscious, like someone raising the flag and saying, "Hey, like my transactions aren't being approved, and I'm not a creep, so we need to be worried." And then someone else is going to be like, "Yeah, you know what? here's some code, and we got to put this in." And
it wouldn't be too hard to at least realize that there is one cohesive body that's causing those discrepancies, and be able to push them out, right?
So whether you'd be able to tell exactly who was doing it, see, there's
maybe not exactly who, but that it
was happening.
That there is somebody creating blocks that are off from the legacy miners.
Yeah, or just it's away from the spirit of Bitcoin, because there's nothing technically wrong with a miner who has 51% power, hash power, discriminating. Like technically code is law, so they can do it. So it becomes sort of a cultural question at that point. Like, do we fork for the sake of like anti-censorship? And that would be a really fascinating kind of circumstance to deal with.
More of an ethical question.
And I don't worry about it too much, but I do worry about it. Like, so to me, I think another way that they could implement a 51% attack is, rather than trying to onboard a lot of hash power, it would be to get rid of hash power. So I often talk about mining and the centralization of mining. And so what happened in China was a really great example. A lot of people tried to look at that as like, oh, America gets all this opportunity now because China's not mining. And what I saw was, no, like if you are starting a Bitcoin mining business and your business model is, I'm going to rent a big warehouse and I'm going to fill this with thousands of mines, like that is a huge target.
I mean, that reminded me of something that, like, another way to implement this then would be a strategically targeted military attack on mines, right? Mining operations, which means I wouldn't be surprised if I saw heavy artillery eventually protecting these sites.
It would. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, some of these Bitcoiners already talk about that kind of thing.
If you think about countries that tell a mine operation, hey, we're going to come take your stuff because we don't want you doing that. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to have to protect.
Yeah. That's starting to veer into like a different.
It's going to be the new Ukraine.
It's definitely. I think it's more likely to be bureaucratic attacks than military for the time being.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking like hundreds of years.
Oh yeah, me too.
Because Bitcoin does feel like a multi-100-year technology.
This is the.
And so I'm thinking like 21, 23.
That's reasonable. I say to people, if we're not early, right? Because people are like, oh, I missed Bitcoin when it was so cheap, and I'm like, if we are not early, that means that Bitcoin's going to be over in my lifetime, right? Like Bitcoin's not going to be over anytime soon. Early is like the first 300 years.
I mean, if there's anything, it's valued at like almost $1 trillion. It's like that says a lot about its security and what the confidence people have in it.
Well, so I hope in terms of mining and the proof of work, like, do you remember SETI?
No.
The Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It was a software that you could install on your computer in like maybe it was the late 90s and early 2000s. And whenever your screensaver would come on, so whenever your computer wasn't being used, it would run these algorithms to check for patterns in radio signals that satellites were pulling from space, and they were trying to find evidence of patterns of, that there was some sort of intelligent life out in the universe. I'm really inspired by the idea of there being all of this kind of unused processing power all around the world. And if we could maybe take advantage of wasted energy that we're not that we're using, but we're not making use of.
Absolutely, yeah. Max Kaiser, I don't know how much you might be into him, but I've listened to him talk about Bitcoin for like more than 10 years. And he always says, Bitcoin is just sunlight converted, like pure energy converted to usable money. It's like about as good as you can get.
Yeah, so a lot of people argue about the mining, and there was a discussion that came up not too long ago, maybe like 3-4 months ago, saying that they had to change the protocol because the fees weren't enough to keep encouraging miners to mine Bitcoin. And to me, I mean, this is a great fiat mentality. We're like, okay, so the only reason why miners mine is because they get Bitcoin for doing it, and they can sell the Bitcoin for dollars. I'm like, do you not know, or do you not understand like what's going on or what we're doing here? Like, it's not about that actually. Like, you mine, and then if you get Bitcoin for mining, like, whoopee, you're getting money for what you were saying earlier, securing the network.
Going back a little bit to the whole pooling of resources. I mean, it sounds like a great idea, but at the same time would have to be like an open source project, because I would not trust some software I'm putting on my computer to use my CPU.
It should be an open source project. I mean, I think there should be, it's because Satoshi's idea initially, even though it's kind of funny because he understood that it wouldn't last forever, but the way he implemented it was one computer, one vote. That was the status of the Bitcoin protocol when he implemented it. He understood that you could manipulate that by having a vastly superior computer. There's a post, so that I have this book called The Book of Satoshi, and it's from 2014 and collects the early writings. It actually collects a lot of his writings until he disappeared. He talks about this. He asks people like, let's not go crazy with the mining for a little while if we can, because he understood like how nuts it would get.
So another scenario that I can think of, another attack vector here, maybe, not a country, but let's say some sort of nefarious thing takes control of devices remotely.
Yeah.
So then that's actually the plot to the new Ghost in the Shell, the one in Netflix, 2043. It starts in 2043. Which is a moment where an AI manages to basically integrate really well with a person. And then what they do is they manage to gain enough control. The economy has become totally digitized at that point. They managed to gain enough control of the economy, not quite specifically in the blockchain sense, but enough to basically put everybody at zero. And that begins a sort of like, they call it the sustainable war, which is a sort of new regime that the AI was, that was its end
Zero in terms of what?
Zero as in every account in the world went to zero.
Banks, okay, gotcha.
Banks, people, countries, everything goes to zero. So that's
the Great Reset?
Yeah, like a reset. But except the Great Reset, it never occurred to me that the Great Reset had to do with going to zero. I have no idea what the Great Reset is actually.
Well,
I mean, there could be many definitions, right?
I think so, yeah. But that's one of the things, like the whole CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, everyone's on a digital currency, and then the government can decide to say, okay, well, we're going to take money from you.
Right. Of course, that would not be possible with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin, it would be able to circumvent that.
Not your keys, not your coin.
Yeah, because Bitcoin, I mean, the way it works now is permissionless, so you don't need anyone's, all the transactions are... There's nothing in the transaction data that really tells you what the transaction's for. There are certain things about the address that can give you an idea, certain ideas about certain things, but really you don't know what the transaction is for. So that's a big... You don't know if it's someone moving it from one of their wallets to another, if they're buying something, if they're buying drugs, if they're giving a gift to a friend.
Right.
Like, there's no...
That's pretty incredible, man. That really all these attack vectors are very, very unrealistic. Unrealistic at all.
So how about... Go ahead.
It goes back to what we were talking about before we started recording at the NSA and recording the whole internet, right? It's the... maybe you could do it, but it would require such an astronomical dedication of resources.
And it just also feels like the amoeba of the rest of the network could pinpoint and sort of push out the bad actor pretty quickly. And then that just becomes a huge waste of resources for the attacker. Like you just kind of look dumb spending. I think the number is like I was watching somebody talk about it. It would cost you like 7 billion, maybe more, 10, 20 billion.
Yeah.
And the network pushes you out, and then it's like, great, you just wasted
money is gone.
10, 20
your
billion
dollars, I should say, are gone.
And the network, maybe the network gets dented, because maybe confidence gets hit a little bit, but
yeah, so the price goes down. I mean,
it's not going to obliterate it.
That's the funny thing, right? Like, so, I mean, unless they can do something like break the code or hack the code, break the cryptography of the private keys.
So that brings us to quantum computing. But that also seems like incredibly easy to just hop onto a new quantum proof encryption.
Well, okay, so maybe it would. Again, I don't know. Bitcoin hasn't been under that kind of an attack in a long time. There was
could get tricky.
Really early on. I remember there was a problem where someone could send Bitcoin that hadn't actually been mined yet. So there was an exploit where they were creating like billions and trillions or whatever of extra Bitcoin. That was like 2010, really early on. They fixed that, and obviously those were not mined. So even like if your node was following the proper rules, it would have realized that anyways. But what was the point I was trying to get at?
All right. So what if Dr. Burns,
Mr. Burns,
what if Mr. Burns or Bill Gates decided to block out the sun, and then we had no electricity? Would Bitcoin survive?
That'd be the least of our problem. Bitcoin.
I remember what I was going to say. It was that with quantum computing, we haven't been under attack, anything like that, and that was a really quick fix. I think it took like a day for Satoshi to. At first, he said, "Okay, go back to the old version or something, or make sure you upgrade to the new version." Whatever it was a quick fix. Can we do that today? Because you can see there are certain data explorers that will show you statistics about Bitcoin. Maybe if you Googled Bitcoin, there was some guy, I can't remember what his name is. He's got a great page. It'll show you the version of Bitcoin that people are running and what percentage. And you can still see that there's actually, different percentages of people who are running older versions. So it could be an issue. It would be interesting to see. I think it would survive, but
I think so. Because
whoa,
it would be another expensive brief attack, because there are I guess theoretically I've read quantum proof encryption, so I don't know what that would mean for the past of the blocks, if that matters, because encryption wouldn't that only matter as the blocks are being written?
So a part of the problem is that the encryption that was used to create the private keys, and there are Bitcoin that haven't been moved in years. So there are Bitcoin whose private keys are based on, encryption.
Oh, wow. So there could be like a retroactive looting.
That's something that people worry about, or people beg for it. Like some people come and say, hey, we should release Bitcoin that haven't been moved in 10 years because that would, give more Bitcoin to the miners. And
what?
I know, it's so sad.
I wonder what the legal ramifications of all that would be, using.
That's a whole nother thing.
Yeah. We'd have to ask Craig Wright.
Taking someone's Bitcoin because you used a quantum computer and they had an old encryption. And so it's it's my Bitcoin now. Code is law, baby.
And in a way, yes. That's kind of
should have been on top of it.
That's the crazy thing. And what could they do with it? So they could steal all this old Bitcoin
pirates, guys. Come on.
I can imagine that kind of thing in the future. New career. But it wouldn't be Bitcoin first, right? If they had quantum attacks, Bitcoin right now it's worth less than $1 trillion. So why wouldn't you attack the banking sector? Why wouldn't you attack one of these industries whose data is worth several, hundreds of trillions of dollars? Why are you going to
hit Bitcoin?
It's kind of
because no one's expecting it.
True. It is one of the bigger fights that anybody would want to take up. So I think it would be someone motivated with actually hurting the idea. Yeah, it would be ideological.
And why would that person have that tech? Usually these ideological people are so blinded.
CIA wants to destroy Bitcoin and still,
unless they invented it.
Americoin.
What if they invented Bitcoin?
Oh, well, sure.
So far we've said NSA and CIA. I think the censors are going crazy right now.
Yeah, probably.
No, because it's something that people bring up. Who invented Bitcoin? Does it matter anymore? Craig Wright claims to be Satoshi. And something that I've been saying lately is that I know that I would feel a lot more confident in claiming to be someone I wasn't if I knew that person was dead and couldn't defend themselves. So I wonder if Craig Wright knows that maybe Satoshi is dead.
Or he knows the levels of like secrecy, because I don't think Satoshi is one person.
Yeah, probably not.
I think Satoshi is a group. Mm-hmm. Except, I mean, I don't know how they could be keeping the secret so well. But I guess there's plenty of stuff we don't know about.
If they're a group, why didn't they assassinate Craig Wright? Or maybe it was one of them and they're just, again, why didn't they assassinate Craig Wright?
Maybe they were a cult and they killed each other.
I mean, why would they? They're going to be like, you know, crazy dudes saying whatever they want all the time.
Yeah.
But the people who are involved,
and that's how we look at him.
The people that are involved in the inception of Bitcoin are so probably unfathomably rich. Why would you even bother caring?
I think it's more likely one person for what you said earlier, is that how could they keep it a secret?
That's true.
That's true. Satoshi says that he had tested it for over a year before he published the paper. So, like, did he just test it with himself?
I heard about some meetings on a beach in the Caribbean with some companies before Bitcoin's paper came out, and they were testing different digitized blockchain type monies, but they kept getting shot down by the government. And so I heard that there was something from a society that was already attempting something legally, but they saw like how much the government just was not giving them the resources that they needed. And so it went in, that's one theory that I've heard.
I imagine that, like, when I read the white paper for the first time, which we have like right up here behind me, sublimated on aluminum. The first time I read it, I got this strange feeling that Satoshi was traumatized by some sort of credit card chargeback. You know, and
so he's a merchant,
or maybe someone who worked for a merchant.
He got an overdraft fee, and he just was like,
no, it was like, so because the double spend thing, it's to me, I think it's a metaphor. The idea that a customer comes to you, gets a good or service from you, and then is able to get the money back afterwards and then spend it again somewhere else. That, to me, that's the double spend problem. That's not what most people think of as the double spend problem. Because they usually kind of, I don't know. I don't even know what they're thinking about in a lot of times. But so Bitcoin stops that from happening, right? Like if you provide a good or service, someone pays you for that service. If there's a reason for a refund, then they have to go through whatever the normal channels are for getting a refund, not call the credit card and, you know, put you through like 60 to, 180 days of like back and forth letter writing to prove did you or did you not provide the service? Did they or did they not follow the like that's, to me, that's what was maybe my trauma from when I used to deal with like merchant services provider when I like worked for an event ticket sales like so many years ago. But that's what I got from it. He talks about that. And so I don't know, maybe it was them trying to solve like some crazy money problem. I don't get that sense as much because a lot of the discussion in the early days was they didn't seem to think it was going to work, or they didn't realize that it was going, if it worked, that it was going to blow up.
Who's they though? I mean,
pretty much all of them. Like there's archives of Satoshi's.
You never know.
Yeah. I mean, I think the purpose of trying is to see if it will work. But even if it worked, there was no guarantee that would be the project that like blew up.
Yeah. So, I mean, to that regard, maybe they didn't know if it would work, but I think it was like, a group of people that were very well acquainted with finance and like maybe experimental financial instruments. And maybe they brought in a lot of elements that they just, believed in and have experience in. And maybe they didn't know it was going to work, but they kind of like said, maybe this is a good balance here.
I certainly think that the experiences were varied and diverse. Some of the people probably did have finance backgrounds. I don't think that was Satoshi's main concern. And that's where I think where the title and the first sentence probably comes from. In calling Bitcoin a peer-to-peer electronic cash, I think he's trying to take it away from the way we view traditional financial instruments. He's trying to create this sort of like asset class or this thing that works distinctly differently from them.
Yeah, I was just going to say, going back to the whole double spend thing, it's really an issue because all the money gets centralized into one, like a couple institutions, and they kind of decide whether, whether you keep the spend or you keep the spend. And it's a centralized issue. But by doing peer-to-peer, then, you're removing that middleman. It's just between you and I, and we have to resolve it.
It's interesting that they say cash, and I guess with Lightning things are a little bit different, but it seems, I always feel like Bitcoin is more analogous to gold.
Oh, sure. And the analogies are, that's a whole other kind of rabbit hole. Like, what's the best metaphor for Bitcoin? It's a new thing. It's changing some of the things that we used to do, but it's including certain properties that didn't exist in money before. Like money never had a consensus protocol, a public ledger consensus protocol before. This is the first time it's had that. So this makes it a new thing, and we don't know how that really works yet. And constantly trying to put it in boxes, which is what, if you read the whole paper, right? So it's 9 pages. It's in the word cash is in the essay, is in the title, and then it's in the first sentence of the abstract, which is just the repetition of the title. The rest of the paper doesn't talk about cash. It doesn't talk about what cash means or what cash is. It's kind of throwing the word out there. I don't think he was trying to make a strong statement about what Bitcoin meant to be. Cash, perhaps in the sense of you can use it in a store and it's like simple in that sense. There's no third parties like a credit card where it has to go through a processor. Cash in that, I think in that sense, that it's like directly between you and the person that you're getting the good or service from, and not cash in the sense that it's quick, because it's not. Well, like it never was.
Like doubloons are, you could get a service for doubloons, but I don't want to carry a bag of heavy metal on me. Right.
But then we get into things like Lightning, where it's kind of supposed to be that solution, that cash solution.
And how liquid is that? Like, is it you still both need the same app, right? The same wallet that can interface with one another?
No, you just need an app that's
Lightning
running the Lightning
that's
protocol.
running Lightning, right.
And there's been a lot of stuff going on. I think Lightning was invented in 2015, implemented in 2017, and it got really big last year. So in terms of liquidity, that has to do with organization. Are you familiar with how the Lightning protocol, like in the liquidity in the Lightning protocol gets like created?
I don't think so. Do you want to do like a 5 to 10 second?
Yeah, it's real simple. So it's
1, 2.
Oh, I hate you. No. Okay. So, they're called Lightning channels. So 2 people have to have Bitcoin nodes with the full Bitcoin protocol running the full copy of the blockchain.
So is that like to use Lightning, you have to be running a node?
Someone does.
But does that mean that whatever method you're using Lightning, is that their job? Are they doing that for you?
Probably.
Well, I mean, like for instance,
I'm not running a node, so I'm not going to use Lightning.
From his node, he could have Lightning channels open and then connected to his wallet. So he doesn't have to be with the node in his hand, but he can be connected to it.
Right. Well, but what about a regular person?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a great example. You got the Stacker News hat on. So Stacker News, if you go to the website, they give all of their members Lightning wallets, but Stacker News is handling all of the actual liquidity and Lightning channels and all the back end.
So yeah, there can be like one central person running the nodes.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, the way Stacker News works is that you can fund your account with an external wallet, and it allows you to tip or give donations to people for posting or for comments and things like that. It's a really interesting methodology. And so most of the Lightning wallets that people have, someone somewhere else is running the Lightning node for them.
But back to how it works, because at least from how I understand it, it's like you make a Bitcoin transaction with somebody, and then it's locked in like a multi-sig wallet, I guess. And then whatever Bitcoin is in there becomes Lightning, I guess you could call it, and it could freely go back and forth between channels without having to go onto the blockchain. That's why it's called like off-chain transactions.
Interesting. Yeah.
But we could eventually close that channel, and then that's a new Bitcoin transaction taking place. So to me, that's the issue with Lightning. Like it kind of, well, I guess not really an issue, but it does reduce the number of Bitcoin transactions, but it locks them. So, if you have a lot of Lightning happening, a lot of I guess it has
channels being open.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. So while the Bitcoin is sitting in Lightning, it's not doing anything on the base layer. But what that allows for is for the Bitcoin to be doing things in the Lightning network. Now, how it does things is based on what I was about to explain. So it's like how the Lightning network works. So you have to create Lightning channels. Let's say I have half a Bitcoin and you have half a Bitcoin. So we could create one channel between us with half a Bitcoin of liquidity on either side. So that means that from my side, someone could send a transaction as much as half a Bitcoin, or from your side, someone could send half a Bitcoin. If they did that, that would then shift the balance of the Bitcoin between us to one side or the other. And then that's how all the channels work. So I have to be connected to people on my side. You have to be connected to people on your side. And then that's how people on either side send Bitcoin Lightning to each other.
As far as crypto goes, it sounds incredibly boring, but it sounds incredibly secure. It sounds incredibly secure.
Yeah. Well, so there's Taro. I mean, if you're interested in like Web3.
I'm into like the shittest of the shit coins. I love an experimental blockchain with some good contracts built in.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if you need the blockchain, then that's, I guess a personal thing that you need the blockchain for.
It just makes me think like a blockchain seems like such a useful tool when it comes to like archiving things. Like because I was like wondering, I'm thinking about like a municipal permitting department. They have records of a bunch of things. Would blockchain be of any more advantage than like having a server room with tons of memory? Because what if that gets destroyed, right? Wouldn't a blockchain be able to retain information through a distributed?
But that's no different than a server room. Like a server room, you could have redundancy by having copies in other server rooms. I think when it comes to trying to apply the blockchain concept to other sectors of the world or the economy, let's say like the public sector, it really depends on where you're applying it. If you're trying to apply it in the sense of, the distributed thing, well, that's just distributed. That's not blockchain. A data file can be distributed. Google's networks
a
are
data
distributed.
file that continues being written.
Yeah, so that already exists. It becomes a question of like, why does it need to be a blockchain? So if it was some sort of records, it could be maybe property records, boundaries, things like that. You wouldn't necessarily want a blockchain for the whole thing, but what you might want is a blockchain for every single like individual unit. Like let's say every property might have its own blockchain, so that every time there was a permit pulled for that property, or there was some sort of construction or changes or whatever, then that property's blockchain would get updated with new blocks to reflect the changes. But I don't understand how the methodology of how the blockchain works is useful for just saving data. It has to be like really specific.
I guess it's just for that automatic shutdown. Like it shuts down your water the minute you stop paying because it knows.
So now you're talking about smart contracts, right? And you don't need a blockchain for that.
Really, you do, but
why would you need a blockchain? What you need is an oracle. You know about oracles, right?
No, tell me.
So the oracle is the smart contract has, if X then Y. So I'm sticking, let's say, some money or some crypto into some kind of this contract. It's locked. It's stuck. Well, how does the contract know when to actually execute something, right? Like in my favor or against my favor? It relies on an oracle.
Not the blockchain?
No. Because the contract is not alive. It's not. It might be smart, but it's not alive. So it's not actively looking at the blockchain. So who's actually looking at the blockchain is a service called an oracle, and this played a big role in some of the fallout with the Terra Luna disaster, because the oracle then is reporting to all these smart contracts what the status of like the asset or the triggers are. And when something gets triggered, it will then cause the contract to execute. In the Terra Luna situation, there was like one of the largest Oracle providers. For some reason, they were not programmed to report the price of Luna under 9 cents. I mean, under Terra, under 9 cents. So all of the blockchains that relied on that oracle for their smart contracts were allowing people to do trades with the token at a price of 9 cents, even though it was worth like tiny fractions of a penny. So they were using their tokens to borrow stable coins and then to do all kinds of crazy stuff. That's what oracles. And there hasn't really been a solution to that problem yet, because blockchains don't solve that problem. We need, I talk to Web3 and crypto people all the time, and I've become really passionate about this. We need to be open to the idea of another protocol. Like there needs to be a smart contract protocol, a distributed protocol. It doesn't need to be a blockchain. It doesn't need to be an asset. It like, think about like BitTorrents, right? Like I still use it. I never made any money from BitTorrents. I never paid any money to use BitTorrents. It just needs to be a protocol everyone can download who's interested in doing smart contracts. Everyone else is like maintaining that network, who's participating in it. So as long as people want to do smart contracts, as long as you have that software running on a computer, your smart contracts are going to execute. That's what we need, I think.
But I guess the blockchain gives you sort of like a historical context, at least.
Okay, so then you've got Bitcoin, right? So you have this secondary protocol.
Data in Bitcoin. There's no information that you can derive from Bitcoin.
There's the Bitcoin itself.
The Bitcoin, yeah. But if you wanted the smart contract to execute, or like you said, the Oracle handles that. But if you wanted the smart contract to use past data, Bitcoin, you can't store too much information in there.
No, it's what is the data, right? Like, I mean, so to me, the problem with the blockchains is that the unit that's being kind of like measured or moved around on the blockchain is a digital asset that's being sold and traded for money. So if you had a blockchain that was not about that, then maybe you could find a way for it to work. So are you familiar with the Bit DNS concept?
No.
This wasn't one of the early like altcoin concepts. It was the idea that, okay, so instead of having this centralized ICANN who controls all of the domains, and then you have to like, pay them a bunch of money to give you like, .com or .org. And now we've got like all these .everythings because a bunch of people spent a bunch of money to convince this organization to create these domains for them. And I think there's only like 7 main like DNS servers that like the whole internet relies on for all of these domains, all the .coms, all those things like are relying on these 7 servers. So the idea was that, hey, well, why don't we create like this other blockchain that when you get the proof of work, instead of getting Bitcoin, you would get these Bit DNS tokens, and each one would allow you to have a domain. And so there's only as many domains as there are tokens that have been mined. And the way the mining would work, they suggested, was merge mining it with Bitcoin so that the Bitcoin miners themselves would use the same proof of work algorithm to mine both protocols. So, the protocol itself is like a really small, tiny, easy thing to run. And all the processing is just random number generation. So like, let's just stick a second protocol on there. And then as they're doing the Bitcoin mining, they can also mine this other thing. So that was like one of the early
But then why wouldn't people
ideas.
Then why wouldn't people just trade the servers? It's like you're tokenizing servers instead.
What do you mean? No, it's not the servers.
Not the servers,
the tokens, the Bit DNS tokens.
Yeah, because you're exactly. So
but you would trade them for Bitcoin. Or you could trade them for dollars, I guess. But the idea at the time was that if you were merge mining it with Bitcoin, then on the same transaction you would have both the transfer of the Bitcoin from the buyer to the buyer to the seller, and the transfer of the domain from the seller to the buyer.
I guess it just makes sense to me that it would be in dollars that the value of something would be measured, or its efficacy, because it kind of just says how much energy are people willing to put into whatever mechanism the crypto is providing.
I certainly understand why you would say that, but I don't. The dollar is like a very, very bad.
It seems like any currency is a waning tide. Currencies themselves, like even Bitcoin, I think its magnitude gives it this sense of potential and stability, potential stability.
Yeah, potential stability. Yeah,
but even then, like you said, Satoshi knew it's not forever. It's like currencies in general are something that you know.
With that example, it seems a little uneven because like something that you or I like, because you said the money will represent how much energy you're wanting to put into it. Yeah, so you and I putting $100 into it, that okay, you're a little more interested. But for someone who has billions and billions of dollars, you know, putting $1 million into something is not a lot of energy for them.
Yeah, I think that's
comparatively.
That's why it's for me. It's like currencies, the fiat currencies, the dollars. It makes it really hard to have discussions about like what are values, how do people express their value in the modern world? Because as Chimp just said, people who have access to the printing press, they can more or less do whatever they want. So the value of the dollar, or in other words, the cost of the dollar is different for them than it is for someone who works like a wage job or a salary job. You know, you're making, you know, whatever, like your 5 or 6 figures. That's like, oh, that's quaint, that's cute, but that's like nothing compared to someone who can just, oh, I'm gonna take out a $100 million loan and do something. So it's not a good measure, because those people and their machinations, Congress and the Federal Reserve and all the banks and all these institutions, they heavily distort the market, heavily. And
whales.
Whales and just, you know, I mean, yeah,
because it's not just the people who print the money, but also people close to people who print the money, or they have access to lots of money. Whales.
Regardless, it doesn't have to be dollars. I mean, at the moment, let's say it's dollars. Eventually, maybe Bitcoin may be the main currency of the world or the country. And then in that case, it's just how much Bitcoin are you willing to put into something for its machinations?
Yeah, I'm very concerned about price discovery. The idea of price discovery is important in economics. It's important to the concepts of free markets, or, you know, like the invisible hand. When we don't have like the semblance of free markets where there's competition, there's like open.
You mean like real free markets? Because that sounds
not like
scary
real
to me. That sounds like corporate tyranny.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call that a free market. That might be like a capitalist utopia. But I don't know if I would call that a free market, because doesn't that inherently unfree the market, right? Like when a corporation has the power to then impose its will upon jurisdictions and places.
Who's the police there that's going to police the free market?
Who's the police ever?
If someone gains enough momentum, I guess it's just a matter of trying to knock them off their throne.
Like, yeah, that's what I think. That's history, though. That's all of history.
Yeah,
you know, there were empires, and then like the Mongols came in, or
so in a free market, what mechanism is there to keep it from the balances getting too different?
I don't know if we can ever really expect that. We can hope for that and work towards that. Like those are, you know, we have to imagine what our goals are. And
well, it seems like Bitcoin definitely does seem like the closest thing to something like that. Except at the same time, you know, it makes me think about who owns most of it, and what that is going to look like if everything goes in that direction.
Scary thought, right? You've got all these like really radical ideological people who are maybe like super anti-government, maybe they're extremely religious, they're very they're very moralistic. Like, what happens when these are billionaires and they decide to start like reshaping the world in their image? It's not necessarily a pleasant thought. I mean, if
Bitcoin came from, you know, the deep depths of sort of internet, it's like, who's in the deep depths of the internet?
The creeps and the freaks. So, you know, but the creeps and the freaks need services, so they're going to have to. So the problem is, like, right now we still have the dollars, so they can just keep spending their dollars, and no one's forcing them to get rid of their Bitcoin. What I hope for is like the situation where there are goods and services that are only available in Bitcoin that are attractive enough that people then kind of spur the Bitcoin circular economy. I mean, I think inevitably price goes up, but what causes that, right? Like, does price go up because we expect it to go up, because one day Bitcoin is going to be the world currency, as you had mentioned the possibility of earlier, or like, does it go up because we keep taking advantage of what Bitcoin does as a technology, like what it allows for socioeconomically. That's what I hope for. Like I hope it becomes valuable because it makes our communities and our economies more valuable, not just because it's like scarce. It is, sure.
Yeah, it seems it's $1 trillion speaks for itself. It seems like Bitcoin might take it.
All right, guys, we're starting to come up on the hour mark. We still have a little bit of time, but any closing thoughts? Any final subjects you want to hit?
Well,
questions you had.
If you're ever in Miami, you should come to Bitcoin Brunch on a Sunday, and I have these kind of conversations every Sunday.
I didn't ask you to show
to everyone.
No, for sure, yeah. Like I get tourists, I get people from all over the world. It's the like only crypto related event that happens every Sunday in Miami. So anyone who's interested in crypto or Web3, if they're in Miami and they Google, like Miami crypto, I'm the event that comes up.
Have you guys heard of Urbit?
I feel like I have, but I can't recall.
It's a very odd project going on, which is separate from crypto. It's basically trying to rewrite sort of the way that the internet is built and making every explorer into your own. You run your own server basically, and so it creates sort of a distributed operating system where you're not, the internet is not many people reporting to one server like Facebook, who then provides the interface for everybody. But it's everyone is their own server, and they basically it's I guess peer-to-peer in its own sense in that way, and that you're not going through a third-party server to communicate back. It's literally just between you two, and so the apps that are built, they're not centralized apps, which I guess similar to crypto, but they're apps that just exist. And like, let's say you have one app that has a list of your friends and one app that maybe is a map. The two can interface very easily because it's not like they're different companies or anything, and they're just both part of this like open.
They share a similar protocol. They have the same language.
Because of the way that they're just written into the.
But are you referring to like a social network, or are you referring to like a computer in general? Like how?
So that's the great question, is that question right there is that it is a different kind of internet that's written in a way that it is a social network because that's what you can do with it, but you can do just about anything you want with it too.
Because have you heard of the Fediverse?
No,
because that's something similar. Like it's.
Well, but you were talking about like hosting your own server. So I mean, so you're talking about like hosting the files and things like that. So like the map would be, maybe you would have a copy of the map on your server, and then you could share that with the people who you wanted to share. Like, is it an operating system? Is it a device?
It's a distributed operating system. So it's an operating system that exists on the network. It's not, so your computer's running it, but somebody just built a personal Urbit server. So it's a separate little computer that basically runs your Urbit. They call them ships. And so basically your identity is within your ship. Yeah. And from there, it's like you don't have to rely on Facebooks and Instagrams and anything like that.
You just connect to your server.
Yeah, it is a social network, and it is also an operating system.
Yeah, there's a few things like that out there. I haven't never heard of Urbit, but it sounds very similar. I wonder if it's like even more in depth.
Well, the captain likes ships, so I'll be looking into
there's
that.
Like Start9. Start9 has like an Embassy OS. What's the other one called? Umbrel.
I have Umbrel, Raspberry Blitz. I mean, those are like more, I guess, Bitcoin.
I think you could think Urbit's pretty interesting. The guy who started it, people feel very sketchy about him.
That sounds interesting.
Well, we had kind of an episode on that.
He's a monarchist. He believes in going to a monarchy, and
I've met monarchists before.
Competent people at the top.
Yeah, the idea of like if you own it, you treat it better than if you're just renting it.
Right. Well, but it's always weird to me that he says monarchy, because when he really gets into it, what he means is a CEO.
Or a king.
Yeah, he doesn't say king. He always kind of brings it back to CEO, which makes me just think like
probably a fan of Elon Musk then.
I've never heard it. What's his name? Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin is the guy.
Sounds familiar.
But he's made very untasteful jokes, and so he gets a very bad reputation.
Okay, well,
amongst who?
What can you do? It's 2022.
Amongst who?
Everyone's made untasteful jokes.
Regular.
I am an untasteful joke.
All right, awesome. So I guess we're gonna end it here because we gotta start prepping.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for joining us, Prem.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
I appreciate all the knowledge that you dropped.
Happy to drop it.
Oh yeah.
Peace.
Later.